Welcome, everyone. We are so glad that you could join us today for this important webinar hosted by Rails to Trails Conservancy. My name is Yvonne Wangi, and I'm the Trail Resources and Planning Manager here at RTC. And I'm happy to be with you and help kick off today's conversation. Today, we're here to talk about protecting rail banking, a critical tool to preserve railroad corridors and create the beloved trails that connect our communities. We'll be focusing on a new legislative challenge, H.R. 4924, a bill recently introduced in Congress that threatens to disrupt the rail trail movement. And if passed, it could render rail banking virtually unusable. We'll begin this session with a brief overview of what rail banking is and why it matters, then explore the specific threats that are posed by this bill. After that, we'll move into a moderated discussion with some exciting panelists who will bring deep experience and perspectives to this issue. Next slide, please. So we are thrilled to be joined by Kevin Mills, our Vice President of Policy, who will lead the conversation with two speakers. David Drock is the principal at Railroad Real Estate Consulting, LLC, where he advises U.S. railroads on real estate negotiation and documentation. He also practices law in Minnesota through Drock Law, PLLC. Prior to private practice, David spent 34 years at Canadian Pacific Railway, including 15 years leading its U.S. real estate office. His work helped bring several notable rail trail projects to life, including the Midtown Greenway in Minneapolis and the 606 in Chicago. Dave Baker is a former Republican member of the Kansas House of Representatives who represented District 68 from 2017 through 2022. During his time in office, he served on several committees, including the Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee and Financial Institutions and Rural Development. Dave was a passionate legislative champion for Flint Hills Trail State Park, which was recently honored with induction into the Rail Trail Hall of Fame. Now, we're about a month away from the Trail Nation Summit, which happens on October 27th to 29th in Cleveland, Ohio. This event will be packed with mobile workshops, immersive masterclasses, strategic conversations that will help you move your trail network forward. You'll also experience a World Cafe session and our first ever Trail Network Pitch Fest, which is designed to help you sharpen your messaging and attract investment. It's a chance to connect with change makers from across the country who share your passion for making it safer for everyone to walk, bike, and be active outdoors. So more details, including the agenda, the speaker lineup, and registration information are available at the link in the chat. Registration closes October 10th. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin Mills for his presentation and to lead the rest of this session. So Kevin, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Yvonne. So let's start with what rail banking is. It's a voluntary agreement between a railroad and a trail manager. The corridor is available for trail use on an interim basis, with the railroad retaining a right to reactivate rail service. It came from an amendment of the National Trail System Act in 1983, signed into law by President Reagan. It's a pre-abandonment strategy, legally speaking, with the Surface Transportation Board, a small federal agency, retaining jurisdiction over the corridor. And because these are federal lands, federally protected corridors, it preempts state law. And there are hundreds of rail trails in the country spanning thousands of miles on these corridors. And it's in something like 46 states that have rail bank corridors or projects. Next slide, please. So what are some of the key benefits for rail banking? Well, we could do, go back, thank you. So we could talk all day about the community benefits from the rail trail. We'll save most of that for another day, but of course, very impressive the impact of these trails on their communities. It keeps the corridors intact, as I said, under federal jurisdiction. It preserves the reactivation rights of railroads, as noted. It simplifies the negotiation process between the railroad and the trail sponsor. And adjacent property owners have their rights protected as well. They can pursue takings claims against the U.S., but this happens without disrupting the trail. Next slide, please. So there have been a lot of challenges to rail banking over the years, as you can imagine, in anything that deals with property law in this country. It has gone through the courts, and in 1990, in the Perceau decision, it was all the way up to the Supreme Court, where it was affirmed the legality, the constitutionality of rail banking. In Congress, there have been numerous attacks as well. There were a dozen legislative attempts to gut the law, and they all failed between 1994 and 2006. And the pattern amongst all those different challenges were pretty similar to what we're seeing now, where there's an attempt to essentially undercut the usefulness, the usability of the law. So we now have a new challenge, which, as we said, is HR 4924, the so-called Rails to Trails Landowner Rights Act. And this is really, again, trying to render rail banking unusable. Next slide. So let's talk specifically about how it would make rail banking unusable. The idea, the effect would be an unworkable process that would mean lost rail corridors and lost rail trails. So first thing I'll point out is that it shifts financial liability from the federal government to those local trail sponsors to compensate adjacent landowners for any costs related to trail use they might claim, and regardless of whether they really have a protected property interest. The second thing it would do is it would have the trail sponsor required to get a signature in writing from every single adjacent landowner within 30 days of filing for rail banking. And that's really very impractical because, especially if you're talking about a longer corridor, there are many, many, many adjacent landowners. You're not going to like even physically find everyone. And as everything in our society, if you have hundreds of people, they probably all won't have the exact same view of something, and there'll also just be uncertainty in their minds and what have you. And so it just becomes unworkable to do anything that quickly or to get unanimity among hundreds of people if that's what it is. And so this is a particularly unworkable element. And we also don't hold hostage the needs of a whole community to one person who has questions. Third thing is that trail sponsors assume lifetime responsibility for maintaining the corridor. And sometimes people will step in a short-term basis to save the corridor while they look for a permanent trail sponsor. And in those instances, it seems pretty unfair to say you're going to have like actual legal responsibility to maintain the trail over its lifetime, even though you were only playing a role in this process for a short time. And fourth, the trail sponsor is required to conduct and pay for unnecessary cost-benefit analyses that really seem to be aimed at gumming up the works. And they address irrelevant issues. There's a whole litany of things that are required to look at, such as biosecurity and food security, that you wonder, why is this being pointed at? Next slide. So in addition to all of those things that would make the process unworkable for future rail banking, the bill would create a federal bureaucracy to meddle with existing rail trails. And so the bill requires the Surface Transportation Board, which is a very, very small independent federal agency, and they will charge them with reviewing all existing rail bank corridors. They want them to recommend to Congress maintenance requirements of trail sponsors. Now, remember, this is a bill that has taken all of the federal responsibilities of this federal land and tries to put them on local trail sponsors. And now they want to turn around and tell local trail sponsors how to maintain the trail when that has been a consummate local role. Then it wants the STB to consider requests to narrow the width of rail corridors. So any adjacent landowner might come to the STB and say, hey, I wish this weren't so wide. And the STB would need to consider that. And it seems like the standard pointed to in this bill would be that this ought to match future railroad needs. But those needs may be unknowable at the time because it's only when a business case comes together to reactivate a corridor might you know details about how that ought to be done best. Do you need to store rail cars on it? Do you need access points? Whatever it might be. Obviously, David Drock can tell us more about this than I know, but we feel like that is pretty unworkable. So This all greatly exceeds the capacity of the STB to manage and is not fair to the parties involved and won't get us to good outcomes. Next slide, please. So let's look at the politics of this bill. It's really emanating out of Missouri. The Missouri Farm Bureau is perhaps is one key proponent, the most visible one. Rail banking in Missouri has been, we have iconic world-class trails in Missouri. The Katy Trail goes all the way across the state to about 240 miles. It's beloved by people throughout the state, and it brings in people from all over the world. They also have the Rock Island Trail, again, as a state park. 144 miles, if memory serves, is rail banked by the state, another 40 miles by Jackson County. There's a gap to fill. This is just coming together. But really, between the two, Missouri could be a leader in the world in terms of trail tourism and quality of life that could flow from having these trails. These rail bank corridors are key to it, but it is also where some of the local concerns are coming. And now you have Representative Sam Graves of Missouri, who is also happens to be the chair of the Transportation Committee, um, introduced this bill, got 6 co-sponsors. 3 of them are Missouri colleagues. So again, Missouri a bit of the epicenter of this debate. And it's been referred to the House Natural Resources Committee that's chaired by Representative Westerman of Arkansas and the Federal Land Subcommittee, which is chaired by Representative Tiffany of Wisconsin. And so those are some of the key players in this. Next slide. So last thing I want to leave you with before turning to our guests is what can you do? And I think the most fundamental thing that you could do to help at this point is educate decision makers about rail banking and its importance to your region. We think partly because it has been so long, right? It's been 18 plus years since there's been a congressional challenge to this law. We think even on Capitol Hill, the level of familiarity with it is quite low. And so it is a good time to make sure that we bring up the awareness, the sensitivity to its importance, the awareness that it could be challenged and that you're concerned about that. And then I think to really bring alive any education you do on that, and we can help you with that, right? I think you need to be able to. So I have here a link to our toolbox where we have lots of resources and information about rail banking that you can use in doing this. And we also share a fact sheet in the chat, and we also can help you if you. It's a good idea to figure out how rail banking has been used in your region or in your state. What are rail banked trails currently? What might be future opportunities to use it? And armed with that information, which we can help you get if you don't have local resources to find that, you can really make a good impression about this being something important to your place, as well as something that's important to the country. So with that, I want to pivot to our guests, and I'm going to start with, and we can actually take the slides down. And I want to start with David Drock. And again, David brings a wealth of experience in the railroad industry, 34 years with Canadian Pacific, 15 years heading their real estate arm, which really means he's just got very, very deep understanding of how this law has been used and how it can have an impact. So, David, welcome and thank you for joining us today. Let's just start with the real basic question. Do you find rail banking useful for railroads? Why or why not?
It's extremely valuable. Railroads are always juggling, their service areas and markets and things like that. And, it preserves the opportunity to reach, future plans or economic opportunities in an area. So it's an excellent tool. Um,
Mhm.
it's like, it's like an option you'd have, and, options are good.
hmm Great. So maybe let's go a little deeper. You've got a legal background and have seen so many of these rail banking deals over the years. Let's talk about reactivation of rail service and keeping, and the idea of keeping the title intact to a corridor. Why might that be of strategic value to a railroad?
Well, I mean, the title to a railroad right away can be many different uh, methods or sources of title. And, obviously the railroad could just own the land, but depending on where and when and how a rail line was established, the title could be, kind of like a marble cake of different type of land interests. And some of these, upon discontinuance of rail service, revert or evaporate, and there's no longer a right to use that corridor. So if you can't preserve that, you really can't preserve the corridor. And it's even helpful on you know, kind of, things that you don't think about, like the right to cross streets, the right to cross other railroads, and things like that, basically go with, the rail banking, that if you disconnect those things, even if you had the right of way, would really provide, or really be a hurdle to reactivating rail service.
Hmm. So in a big populated country, trying to put back together railroad corridors as we may have built them in the 1800s is
Uh,
not so easy.
Right. It's often said among the railroad world that, if you had to rebuild the rail system today, it would never happen. It's not, I mean, it's not only just the cost of establishing the rail line, it's the time and effort now to get the permission and authority to establish a rail corridor. That can, certainly in some areas, that can be almost impossible. In other areas, I mean, you couldn't, even if you had all the authority you needed, you couldn't just put a rail line in. I mean, you just, it couldn't be done. You can imagine cities and things like that that are very densely populated, that you couldn't do something like that. And it's important for economic development for the states and the counties to rail bank this land, because you got to think that if some opportunity comes up, a big economic or employment opportunity, like a car factory or automobile factory, or something else that relies on rail, if your community has the availability, say, yeah, we have this site and we can get rail to it, versus another state, yeah, we have a site, we'll have to work on the rail. I mean, who's going to get that opportunity? So
Mhm.
it's a huge economic asset for both the railroads and communities to have it.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, actually, I'm reminded of in the 1990s, there was a similar challenge to rail banking, and Richard Allen, who was Ronald Reagan's national security advisor, testified to Congress about how important these corridors could be to national security in a prolonged conflict. So, just many different kinds of considerations for the country. So let's go to this question I had noted earlier about width of corridors. So would a railroad consistently know in advance the corridor width that they would need to have successful reactivation?
No, not likely. I mean, essentially they'd want to preserve as much as they could. Again, it comes down to an option, having options, and until you know exactly what you're going to need it for, and traffic, and also handling of service. Different customers require different types of things. You need sidings, any number of things that you really can't predict what you'll need. I mean, there are probably some corridors that could be narrower. Corridor width really varies depending upon where they were and when they were located. I mean, obviously, if a corridor, I mean, the eastern part of the U.S., where cities were very well established when railroads started laying down tracks, rights of way tend to be a little bit narrower, because they had to go through already developed areas, and it just, they took what they could get. Whereas the Western U.S., where the first transcontinental railroads had basically wide open territory, the rights of way can be very, very large. I mean, some of them are, I think, 400 feet wide. And, they might look at something like that and say, well, we might not necessarily need 400 feet. But all that can be addressed during the whole negotiation process with like a trail group who's going to do it because you don't have to rail bank the entire right of way. You could certainly establish that the corridor to be rail bank is going to be a certain width versus the entire width, and that can be dealt with in that process.
Yeah, you remind me that part of the value here in having the flexibility of the width is certainly railroad business considerations, but also often if you have a very successful and popular rail trail as an interim use on a rail bank corridor, and then we look at reactivation, you'd say, well, if the corridor can safely and conveniently accommodate both uses, then you can have a rail with trail. There are hundreds of rails with trail in the country, not always in this circumstance we're talking about here, but we've shown that that can be safely accomplished, and that option may evaporate if you are going to you kind of provide some kind of rule of thumb and wave your hand and just say that's the width.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The absolute minimum width is like 17 feet because, anything else will get hit by a train.
Right,
So,
right.
but
Gotcha.
I mean that
And that's bad,
that's
right?
not realistic.
Getting hit by the train. That sounds really bad. So great. So let's say if this bill were to become law, what would you see as the future for rail banking agreements? I mean, do you think they'd be
I,
hobbled or?
I don't think. I mean, I think it would make most rail bank. I think it would basically prevent most rail banking proposals from happening. And one of the things about the text of the thing is it kind of presumes that all right of way has some sort of reversionary language in it or easement or something like that. When it really depends what railroad and what part of the country and stuff like that that determines kind of the quality of the right of way. And like my territory I work with, we mostly had fee title to all the right of way. I mean, we had very little land with reversions or condemnation or other types of ways to acquire right of way. And but this would make it a requirement that we still have to contact all the adjacent landowners, even though they have no interest in the right of way. I mean, they might be interested personally, but a legal interest in the right of way. And you can just imagine how difficult that would be to get multiple people to consent to something where they have nothing at stake. And I don't know where that would lead, but I think it'd be very difficult to assemble, consent. And so you just wouldn't rail bank it. I mean, you could still sell the line. You could possibly have agreements for first right of refusal and things like that. But often under many states' laws, those have a time limit when they're valid or they need to be re-recorded or stuff like that. Just it makes things more complicated, and it certainly wouldn't preserve things that aren't like in fee title, like I mentioned. The right to cross streets and other railroads and things like that.
Mhm.
Those would go away.
Gotcha. Yeah. Thank you so much, David. So we're going to turn now to Dave Baker, but we'll hear more from David and the overall question and answers from the audience. So Dave, it must be a proud time for you in that you were the legislative champion for the Flint Hills Trail State Park, and this rail trail just was inducted into our Rail Trail Hall of Fame this fall.
That is correct, and that's a huge accomplishment. And like some of the folks in Missouri, we had to overcome some objections here in Kansas when that trail was proposed. The Flint Hills Nature Trail originally had some different owners that couldn't maintain the operation of it,
Hmm?
and the trail was in severe disrepair. We'll just go with those adjectives.
Okay.
It was overgrown. I owned a supermarket that adjoined the trail, and we had to maintain the trail and pick up all the trash. And there was a bridge. There's no overpass, and we always had some issues with vagrants underneath that bridge that probably were conducting some illegal activity. So the trail was not an asset before; it was a liability before we brought the state park proposal.
All right. So I believe in an earlier conversation I had with you, you spoke eloquently about kind of the transformative impact of getting the trail right, right? So help us kind of understand, what's the value of the rail trail to your region now, and how has your community changed? How you mentioned getting it cleaned up. What's that transformation look like for you?
So I live in the heart, the middle of the United States. I live in Kansas, rural Kansas, and there's a lot of difference between Overland Park, Kansas, and Johnson County, Kansas, versus Johnson, Kansas, at the other end of the state. I live in a place that is very sparsely populated. We have counties with 5,000 people, 4,000 people in the whole county. A lot of communities that are less than 2,000 people. And the economics, those communities were all put in originally because every 30 miles you had as far as a horse could go. So that's where you had a town. And they were there to support the farming interest. That's all changed. The railroads came and the communities that had the rail service prospered because they could move freight. Well, that's changed also. So now we went from that asset to being a liability. As those trails come in and replace that abandoned rail lines, the number of bicyclists, the number of walkers, the horse people that have all showed up on that trail to enjoy the beauty of it. The trail, when it's finished, will be 130 miles long. Right now, it's about 110 miles long, but that's a long trail, and it's a straight trail, and it's right through some of the most beautiful, beautiful scenery in the whole United States. But in Kansas, only 2% or 3% of our entire state is public land. If you want to come out and see the Flint Hills and the beauty of all the nature and see where the cowboys reside and all that, well, that's okay, but don't get out of your car. So this gives everybody an opportunity to enjoy that. We have a lot of scenery that would remind you of the Appalachians. It's rolling hills. The Flint Hills is Flint Rock. Flint Rock is what the Indians made arrowheads out of. And what's really interesting is what they call flint knapping, when they take the elk horn and they chip away that rock to make it sharp for that. That's there are all kinds of things, and there's no shortage of flint rock. So for anybody who wants to collect some, there's an ample supply. But the trail is just it's a very positive deal. The objections that you referred to from some of the farm group in question there. Um, I'm very familiar with that farm group, and I had to deal with them when I brought that bill. There's 125 House members, and they found me to carry that bill because it went through my home county. It was and with my ownership of the grocery store, I had a vested interest in seeing that situation change. So I carried that bill, and I was informed that there would probably be some consequences, which I can take and pretty well turn just about any room around to my point of view after they understand why I feel the way I do. I I have not had to sell my soul to keep my political career alive. I've been able to afford to fund myself. So that's been a big help. I understand the agriculture side. I used to own 10 sections of farm ground up in Minnesota. And then so the Canadian Railway, yeah, I was real familiar with your Canadian Railway up there. But so I understood the farm community. I served on the Federal Land Bank Board for 6 years. So I understood the finances, and I understood the individual farmers' finances and how they really look on paper. And so I could speak their language. Grown up with them, understand it. The farming's a different deal, though. That they are truly an independent group. And Farm Bureau is one of the groups that has moved in to help provide a real strong lobbying arm for them. But sometimes, and I was able to take and speak to that farm credit with my farm credit and federal land bank background. I was able to address the Farm Bureau opposition, and you have to speak their language, and you got to be careful which hot buttons you push. But yeah, it
So
was interesting.
my understanding is Kansas State Parks, with responsibility for the trail, has a very constructive working relationship with the adjacent farmers to the trail. Can you speak to that at all, or?
We were blessed to have some of the most incredible people who came out and worked with Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks. They were just welcomed in our community. My gosh, they still get invited back for community events. Just really great people, and they were not confrontational. They never used the bully tactic. And I'm with Wildlife and Parks, and I got a gun, and you're going to see this the way I see it, or else. Never had that. Very accommodating. Cleaned up a lot of those messes that were on that trail. That trail had a lot of overgrown area. And then I had one of my friends take a drone out, and this was in the early stages of drone technology, and we flew that remote area from the air, and we took pictures of it. So those remote areas that nobody had probably seen outside of those property owners for 40 years. So ever since the rails became abandoned, nobody had been out there. They're remote. And I mean, the Flint Hills there, it's really remote. But when we got those pictures, now all of a sudden we had different things to talk about. So some of the landowners, it was an education process that things were going to change, and they were going to change for the better. And it'd be really nice that they would be a participant in helping facilitate that. And I think out of all the people we dealt with on that trail, we only have one who's kind of a problem. And the education process for him, he also markets his own beef. So the opportunity for him to take and use some of the pictures and things like that it'll be an economic opportunity for him before it's over. And he just hasn't seen it our way yet, but he will.
Okay. So let's just turn to kind of the question of rail banking as it relates to Flint Hills. So this rail bank corridor, any, kind of any sense of whether rail banking was key to, that transformation that's occurred there. And if this bill were to pass with, the requirements that are put on the local entities that I noted, would you see this as being as practical as it was when you did use it?
We never would have been able to get this done.
Yeah.
It would have been a deal killer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, for where it is now, I don't know how you could ever put that genie back in the bottle. I'm going to tell you, half the landowners, the local landowners, we got to talk about landowners, because a lot of the land has been bought by out-of-state people, the investment community, not local farmers. That's part of the rub here. The local ranchers and farmers, they're losing control of that land to out-of-state entities. Anybody can own the land. This is America, and that's one of your rights, is the ability to own land. The problem is we've had a lot of people who don't live here get control of that land, and they see this as an opportunity to hold everybody hostage. And that's part of where the Missouri situation is. Those aren't people from Missouri, a lot of them. Those are special interest people that live probably in California. So we have to qualify that, but we could not have gotten this done today with those restrictions they're talking about. That's how would you get a landowner in California to ever come to the table?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Dave. So any last words, anything you weren't able to share from our questions that you'd like to make sure people hear?
So one of the things that really, really helped turn the tide is when Emporia, Kansas has an event called the Unbound Gravel. And that's a race. And they race through the Flint Hills, and it is worldwide. I think it's the premier gravel bicycling event in the world. They come from Switzerland to Australia, and it's a big deal. Thousands of these bike riders. It's by far and away the biggest economic impact event in all those areas that are near that community. It's huge. I just can't begin to explain to you. I didn't have a clue what it was. I'm not a bicycle guy. I'm a grocery guy. I'm old and fat. So I didn't understand it. Boy, I'll tell you, I got educated real quick. And there was some big opportunities. The vendor community started showing up. The bicycle shops started springing up. The breweries. I mean, I can't believe how many breweries have taken advantage of this. But the groundswell, a rising tide floats all boats, and that's where we're at right now. The tide is still rising. We do not want to go backwards.
Great. All right. Well, thank you. Let's switch to audience questions now for all of us, all three of us. So all three of us can get our get on screen, get our mutes off, and see what the audience has in mind. And I've got a list pouring in. Let me see if I can't get these out here. So one question, maybe this one's for me, has to do with what's the likelihood that this bill will move forward? Is it the biggest threat coming out of Washington? And what I'd say is, well, first of all, it's the only threat to rail banking coming out of Washington, and is the only threat to rail banking in the last 18 years. And so we can take some comfort in that, a previous dozen efforts to undercut this law were turned back, and that pretty much it's that much more well established. There are that many more hundreds of rail trails and thousands of rail trail miles that are on rail bank corridors where people are having this kind of very positive, transformative experience that Dave just spoke about. And so with all of that experience and positive impact from the law, and with really the, kind of the brilliance of it, and the, proven legality of it and what have you, it's certainly on a more solid foundation than back when there were the first initial attacks on it in the early 90s. So that's, those are maybe some of the fundamentals. On the other hand, we have, very powerful member of Congress putting this forward. And we have, some people are determined to have this question vetted. And so we have not seen any indication that the Natural Resources Committee is yet actively pursuing it. And in that sense, what we actually suggest that you sign up for RTC's alert system so we can keep you up to date on the status, because it's a good time to bring people up to speed and let them know it's important to stand by this law, but we don't yet have a sense that it's an imminent threat. So I guess the way to put it is it's not highly likely to pass until it is, right? And so we don't know. So right now we're not worried about, the next week. But we do think that is a serious proposal coming from powerful people, and so we have to treat it as something important and for all of us to pay attention to and work on. So basically, there was a related question about, well, what has made advocacy on this successful, and I really do think it's that collective experience where people believe in keeping our options open for railroad service, and people experience and believe in and appreciate the power and the essential nature of how these trails are bringing vitality to communities, economic redevelopment to communities. And so I think that's maybe the ace in the hole in terms of answering this challenge, is that so many people are benefiting from this law, and that we really need to continue it for that reason. So let me find some questions more for our guests now. So there's a question of whether there's ever been a railroad reactivation. Um, I can think of cases, but David, maybe we'll turn to you to maybe just kind of address that issue. I know, you're a firm believer in the power of, kind of keeping the options open. On the other hand, these were disused corridors because they ceased to be economic in that particular time and place. But have you ever seen, instances where, kind of the needs change, the circumstances change, the economic climate changes, and you see business opportunity?
Yeah, there have been some reactivations of corridors. I personally haven't been involved in those. I think the
Mhm.
one that comes to mind, I think, is near Portland, Oregon. There was one, I believe, that was reactivated and put back into rail service.
Mhm.
Um, you know, with railroad stuff, the timeline is pretty long though. I mean, so it's the vision of what might be needed might not it might encompass the next 50 years. So
Mhm.
it's again, it's nice to have the option.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, thank you. So here's another question about how you know if you've got your trails rail banked, and sometimes there's local knowledge about that, but RTC does keep track, and if you need information about that, you can reach out to our technical assistance line, and hopefully our team there can put that email in the chat and encourage people to use that. Here more are rolling in. I'm trying to, key. All right. Looking for a new question. So so this is a question about, of all the specific provisions in this bill, which ones seem most troubling, I think is essentially what this question is. What jumps out for you folks?
The land acquisition, the surrounding landowners, getting everybody to sign off on it. That would be monstrous. And the economic impact study they want, they're both draconian. It's just unattainable.
Hmm.
I'd agree.
Okay. And trying to find more questions. We might be,
So I,
no.
I, I just want to make
Yeah,
a
go
point.
ahead.
So when they asked me to carry the bill, it wasn't very popular, okay? Because Farm Bureau, just like Missouri, Kansas Farm Bureau is pretty much out of the same deal. Although Farm Bureau has changed the way they operate. They now have a membership side that is privately owned, and that is different than the insurance side. So that's a change that they don't really like to talk about because the membership side is probably more of a Wall Street group than the actual insurance to rural America. But what happened, the biggest turnaround, the biggest thing that silenced the opposition is we had trail days at the Capitol in Topeka, and we had 350 to 400 bicyclists and trail people and walkers and everybody that used the trail in the state of Kansas had some kind of representation in the Capitol that day. It was the biggest bunch of people, bigger than the NRA days or the Moms for Liberty, any of those people. They were dwarfed in size of all these trail people that showed up. I will tell you, if you want to turn this situation around, you want to fight for your trails, you just physically fill those capitals throughout the country with trail people, and I guarantee you, nobody wants to deal with them. Not eyeball to eyeball. It's a lot easier to do it over a computer and say, "Gee, sorry, have my assistant call sometime and cry on his shoulder." No, you need to be there physically and look those legislators in the eye and make them have to defend why they would do something that's so unpopular with the masses just to take and pacify a few people that probably are doing okay without government help. So I'm just going to tell you, there's the people have the power, the people have to get there, and the trail people. That's a pretty easy group to get excited. They found out, man, did they show up? And boy, they were in their bicycling and hiking outfits, and thank God they didn't bring their dogs. But I'm telling you, it was game over. Anybody who opposed that trail, the opposition was gone. So I
Mhm.
can't begin to reinforce to people. You need an advocate. You need somebody. You can't sit there and think that your elected official or whoever is going to watch out for you and take care of you. That's not going to happen. You got to make sure they know that you're going to be a problem if they don't do what you want. There's got to be consequences for them not representing you. They work for you. Remember, that's how this works. It's a job application.
All right.
They're applying for a job. and you hired them. Now they got to do their job. So don't let them turn this around how they're going to tell you how it's going to be. That's not the way America works. That we still, the power is with the people. So that I will rant and rail about that forever. If you don't fight for it, you lose it. And the trails are a prime example. If you don't fight for these trails, if those elected officials think that you're not watching, it's gone. So it's up to us.
Yeah, thank you. So I do have some more questions from the audience. Does this impact existing rail bank trails, and if so, how and in what timeline? So I'll just take that one super quick, which is the two provisions I had noted earlier about the width of existing rail trails um, being challenged by adjacent landowners and the Surface Transportation Board having to adjudicate that in some way. And then the other being having the Surface Transportation Board look at all the existing rail bank corridors and figure out what are the right maintenance practices and having a conversation with Congress about that. So those are the things. And the timeline was, well, unless this bill passes, it's not relevant. If it passes, then STB would need to work through that. And of course, they're not really staffed to work through that at this time. So it would be a challenge for sure. This is not happening in the next 2 weeks. The next question is, rail trails have a big economic development benefit, especially in rural communities often. Given that, what do you believe is the reasoning behind the Farm Bureau's opposition?
So there's, and I can speak from a landowner point of view. There, when they own that land, they really don't want anybody out there looking at what they may or may not be doing.
Mm-hmm.
That, and I understand that. You know, it's their property, and they want you to make sure you understand. It's kind of an elitist point of view. I own it, and we don't want you to look at it. We don't want you anywhere in it. It's not very attractive when they try to explain why they don't want people on that trail. They really don't have a good reason. The trail does not negatively impact. We had cattle owners, people that graze cattle right up next to the trail, and they were worried about the cattle being scared of the bicycles or whatever. It didn't happen. There's no real good reason. So I'll go ahead and step in it here. I hope nobody holds me accountable. So we had a bunch of landowners when we took that camera and went up above. The ballast and the railroad ties and things that were still on the rail lines, for that had a lot of it been relocated. We'll call it relocated. Okay. And so we kind of tracked down a bunch of that and informed some of those landowners this could result in the situation where they would have to bring that ballast back. We didn't really care about the railroad ties, but the railroad kind of wanted that ballast back. That ballast is really expensive. And some of those guys had taken it to maintain all their driveways and areas around their property. They didn't have permission to do that. They just went in there with tractors and skid steers and high loaders, and they took it, and they took big amounts of it. If they pushed the button very hard, it was going to the negative impact of that. And we didn't dwell on that. We didn't bring that sledgehammer to the table. But we had one lady with wildlife and parks, and I really liked her because she had a really strong personality like me. And she kind of told them, don't you mess with the bull, you're going to get the horns. That's the bottom line. And she said, you guys are in a real weak position because you've taken a lot of advantage of that abandoned rail lines for a long time. And the railroad hasn't said anything. If you scratch that, pull that scab off, you may have to do some things you weren't intending to do, like bring back all that you stole. That's harsh.
I'd also add that I've dealt with a number of farmers and ranchers with various right-of-way issues, and for a person who grew up in the city, the land is just a transaction. Whereas the people out in the country, I mean, railroads follow the topography of the land. They don't follow the angles of the sections or anything like that. So it's not uncommon for a right-of-way to cross through the middle of a field, and a lot of the farmers have a real emotional connection to their section of land or their quarter section, and they feel that when the railroad discontinues operation, that they're entitled to reconnect that property. I mean, they don't view themselves so much as the owner as the caretaker of that family assets, in honor of their ancestors and in benefit for their future generations.
All right, so I've got a couple questions for David. One is what do the railroads think about the bill?
I haven't really had any conversations with the railroads, directly with the railroads um, about this specific bill.
Hmm. Okay. And if you were working with a particular rail company that owns the underlying land outright, are you still affected by the bill?
You are, because it still requires that if you want to rail bank it, that you get the consent of the adjacent landowners. It doesn't distinguish between like an easement or condemnation acquisition versus fee ownership. So you'd still have to deal with them. So I mean, you could still sell the corridor. You wouldn't rail bank it. You just sell it.
Yeah. And here's another where how would you advise a project that's actively planning to pursue rail banking? How would they proceed in this moment? Do you think the STB will consider rail banking less favorably today?
I don't think the STB really, at least my impression of the ones I've been involved in, they don't really express an opinion. It's more of an administrative type of function that, if the boxes are checked, they agree that it will be, they'll impose an interim trail use on the property. And the way that works is that technically the line isn't abandoned. It's the service abandonment of service is suspended.
Mhm.
So it remains technically a part of the National Rail Network.
Great. Yes. So thank you both for your insights and participation here. We're in our last 5 minutes, and so and the audience questions are basically now ending, and so it looks like we had just the right amount of time to satisfy people's curiosity. And let me turn it over back to Yvonne to close us out. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Kevin. And thank you to all of our speakers and panelists today, David Drock and Dave Baker. We thank you so much for making the time. This is an evolving situation, and we're just trying to get out ahead of it and trying to make sure that we are equipping you all with the tools to understand rail banking and educate your decision makers on rail banking. I've dropped a link in the chat to the Surface Transportation Board's map of rail-banked corridors, so that's a place to start. We also encourage you to take advantage of all of RTC's resources on rail banking for your sake and for others as well. And we'll continue to monitor the situation and provide news. If you have any questions about a trail in your vicinity and you're not sure if it's rail banked, we can help with that. Again, there will be a email in the chat for us to for you to reach out to us if you have any questions about trails in your vicinity, and yeah, we can help you fill in those gaps. So just want to thank all of you for making the time. And yes, that is it for our webinar, and keep an eye out for news from RTC on this emerging topic. Thank you.